Hey, everybody, Jaquetta Williams here. It has been some difficult days that we have had to endure with everything that's going on the political side. So I decided to create a lane, create a home for people who want to talk about some other things other than the things that are happening in the current climate. So jumping off, I want to talk about us, things that relate to us, things that elevate us. So I'm joined by my friend, longtime friend, Stacy Lloyd, who is here, and we talk about this subject quite often. And it is about, first of all, Black women, and then it's about Black women dating, finding love, and then attached to that, being women of a particular age. Hey, Stacy. Thanks for being here.
Yes, honey. Thanks
Yes,
for having me.
of course. So let's talk about it because I know for quite some time you were single, but you were definitely looking for love, looking for the match, looking for the right one. You had some hit and misses there, and then kaboom, you found someone. Take
Yeah.
us through the journey.
Well, I first there was this long preparation, right? Like initially, I was about 30. I want to say it was 30 when I decided, okay, I want something more because I was really scared of marriage. Scared of marriage because of divorce, because of the legacy,
Yeah,
unfortunately, of divorce in my family.
yeah,
And it was around 30 that things started to change because I was in my career at Channel 2. And I'm like, okay, well, I've hit some milestones, but I have no one to share them with. And so it's like, okay, I'm afraid.
yeah.
But my heart was saying and having that desire to want to be married. So
Hmm.
for me, I had a lot of situationships, and those situationships were not fruitful in the way that I wanted them to be.
Expound
And
on that. What do you mean? First, let's go back to what was your definition of your situationship, and what were you not getting that you wanted?
yeah, so these, for me, situationships were non-committal, right? These are like, oh, we're kicking it with no strings attached. Some of them would be physical, and some of them would not be. But there was no accountability, commitment there. There was no true, like the lines were always blurred. So
Yeah.
even if there was something that would happen, that I would want to have a conversation about, there was no, well, I'm not a girlfriend, so how to, so in other words, for me, I felt a little bit mute
Yeah.
in the sense of defining the lines and defining what it is I was doing with, said guy at
Yeah.
the time. And so those situationships were just, they're fruitless
Yeah.
in essence,
Yeah.
and
They
it was
produce nothing.
produced nothing because it was like, okay, well, I'm not a girlfriend, so can I request more
Yeah.
time? Can I ask for certain things? And so I would say around 30 is when like that really started to change for me. I'm like, well, I would like to eventually build a family, whatever that looks like. I would eventually like to get married. And so I knew at that point that I had to make some changes. And so I looked inward. And so it's been a journey because here we are, I'm 47.
Hmm.
So the journey started at 30, deciding that, "Oh, this is what I want. I'm going to push past fear. I'm going to push past the possibility of divorce. I'm going to push past all those things, but I'm going to look inward and see what I can do to prepare."
Yeah.
And so the desire came, because the other thing with the situationships is, hey, like if I'm feeling and I'm scared of marriage and I'm not going to attract it. So that's what I'm getting is the situationships.
Hmm.
And so I had to change the desire, then look inward to make those changes. And so that really started around like age 33. And then I went through a series of dating different guys with the intent of, okay, looking toward marriage, but not really pushing it. And when I say pushing it, being very vocal about, okay, I'm dating to marry more
Hmm.
than it's like, let's get to know each other and see where it goes.
Right.
And so I went through that phase of let's date each other, see where it goes, but there's some initial potential there for it.
Yeah.
And so that eventually led to around 30, oh, I don't know how old I was, but I was in my later 30s. I decided to completely take sex off the table.
Ooh.
That was
How
really
did that go over well with the men that you were dating?
you know
Did you
what?
start out with that or did you kind of piecemeal it?
Well, I well, it got to the point where I had to be upfront about it, which also weeded
A lot
those
of people out.
yes,
A
those
lot of
with
men out.
I wouldn't say ill intentions, but we weren't on the same page because if
Right.
I was desiring to get married and you're just wanting to hit it, then we're not lining up. And so there were some boundaries that I realized that I had to incorporate. And I didn't even know what a boundary was. I had read Devon Franklin and Megan Good's book.
Hmm.
I can't remember what it was.
I think they were, it was called The Wait.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
So it was shortly after that, I believe that I really started my journey with that. But it was that book that allowed me to say, oh, there's this thing called boundaries.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I can incorporate these boundaries. I just have to be upfront with the boundaries and I have to uphold those boundaries. And that goes with any relationship, right? You've got to say, okay, these are my guardrails, and I'm not going to go outside of those guardrails and then stick to it. So that's what I applied to dating. Again, I didn't know what a boundary was.
Yeah.
So that big boundary was the no sex. It was no phone conversations after 11 p.m. It was dating someone who desired to get married, not tomorrow, but eventually. And so creating those boundaries allowed me to weed a lot of guys out.
Let me ask this. So when you started, well, not started, but when you brought up the topic of, the no sex,
Hmm.
particularly for men, and when it comes to Black men, because I'm assuming that's primarily the men you wanted to date. How did you approach that conversation? And what are some of the reactions that you got from men who
Well,
I'm sure thought they were going to change your mind about it?
so they thought,
So they
but
thought,
um, you know what? It happened different each time.
mm,
Um, Sometimes very organically, and sometimes I just said, "Hey, look, this is where I'm at in life." Um, and I believe for me, I don't know how it was for you. When I turned 40, it was like I became a whole nother woman.
oh
I was
my
like,
God.
I'm grown
Yes.
now
Yes.
and I have a
I know what
voice.
I want.
I know what I want.
I know what I don't want.
Exactly. And so I was like, you know what? I've never been married. I have yet to have children. And this is where I'm at in life. And I'm not going to make any apologies about it. And so even if the conversation wasn't a natural segue and I had to bring it up, I'm like, look, this is where I'm at. And what I have found looking back, oftentimes that's what guys do. Guys really actually are pretty, unless they're just pathological liars,
Hmm.
they're pretty upfront and they'll be
Hmm.
like, "Hey, I'm not looking for anything serious."
Hmm.
And then we come
We
in
can
and
kick it.
we try to
Hmm.
change their minds, right?
Hmm.
Whatever
Hmm.
way we choose to do that, right?
Right.
And what I realized was that, hey, guys have this down about where they're at for the most part. Right?
Hmm.
And I'm talking good, healthy guys. I'm not talking about, pathological liars, right?
Hmm.
Or, you know, uh, 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 gaslighters and
Right.
no,
Narcissistic men.
yeah, narcissistic.
Hmm.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about
Right.
healthy men are going to voice where they are at in the beginning when they first meet a woman.
Right.
And again, oftentimes we try to change their minds and convince them otherwise, heal, etc., etc. Um, but again, for me, I wasn't brash about bringing it up because I needed to create. What I learned is that you have to create the boundaries before the scenario.
Hmm.
And I have had experiences where no matter what time of day, sometimes locale, and I'm not talking like being at a guy's house necessarily, but I don't know if it was like some pheromones I was giving off or give off but I've literally had guys like very aggressive with their approach toward me. So I found that having that conversation in the beginning, so there's no mixed signals or there's no misunderstanding, is just like, hey, that's off the table. So don't even try to win me over with your penis, basically.
Mhm.
um,
But of course, even though you say that, just like women try to change a man's mind, that when you hear something like that from a woman, I think somewhere in a man's mind, it almost triggers,
yeah.
oh, I want to get you to change your mind. I'm going to get you because she doesn't mean that. She doesn't
Right.
know what she's talking about.
Well, I experienced that with one of my ex-boyfriends. And he was like, "Oh, I support you and everything you do, and I'm down for it." And the whole nine. And about like a year into it, he's like, "Oh my God, like I'm like, well, whenever you get your stuff together and you decide you want to actually put a ring on it, and then we're talking about something." But you knew that when we started dating,
Yeah,
that was off of the table. And so, because I wanted to genuinely get to know you and you get to know me for who I am outside of the physical. And so there's some other spiritual reasons, for me. I grew up a pastor's daughter, so I was definitely preached to and taught that you save yourself for your husband. And, but golly, I mean, I've yet to be I've yet to be married at
right.
47. I can't imagine going 47 years without it.
Yeah.
But but yeah, things are a lot different now than it was with our folks growing up.
Hmm.
So again, and I should mention that I grew up. It wasn't get married; it was get an education, be
Hmm.
independent, have your own, and then get married. So by
Hmm.
the time I got to what I felt like arrived, if you will, again, hit some milestones and was like, oh, okay, I think this is what I want. I'm a little
Right.
apprehensive because I'm scared of divorce, but let me go for it. Um, so again, someone who's grew up very, very independent, marriage not anywhere on the mind, especially in my 20s, all the situationships, then coming up with the boundaries in my late 30s, having those hard conversations very early on to create those boundaries so I could keep them. And then running into my boyfriend who thought he was going to wear me down,
Hmm.
and discovering that, oh, this is what he kind of sought out to do as well.
Hmm.
um Mission not accomplished.
Hmm.
We did end up breaking up, not for those reasons, but there was some compatibility issues
Right.
there that led to the breakup of our relationship. And what I noticed with each boyfriend and even situationships at some point is when you're cutting it off and when you're letting it go, you're actually choosing yourself. When you decide that, you know what, this isn't working, it's not so much about, how do I want to say this? It's not so much about them. It's really about you. And what I noticed was I was willing to choose me. So at this
Hmm.
point, I had thought I was going to marry this guy. And this is my last boyfriend. I thought I was going to marry him. I was in my early 40s at the time. And it was 41 that I was like, no, because
No,
if I force this, right? If I force this, I can see it ending up in divorce because I would be unhappy in the situation.
absolutely. And he might be too.
Having this boyfriend that, you know, was like, "Oh, I'm supportive. I'm
Yeah.
going with it."
Yeah.
And then I basically wore him down. And again, choosing me. So there's that thing with, you know what, this isn't working for me, and that choosing me. And what I was learning was, as much as I said as I that I loved myself through this process. So for me, honestly, being married, or the desire to want to be married,
Hmm.
so the desire to want to be married led me to discovering and finding myself.
Okay, so let's go back one step because I know there are going to be some women and maybe some men who watch this, but particularly women who may want to walk down that road that you did. But let's just say when they were in relationship, they did have sex with their boyfriends or significant others, and then because they're recalibrating what they want, sometimes I find people. may say sex is really hard to take off the table because we are grown people. You are going to be in proximity with this man. I'm sure you kissed your boyfriend, and there may have been times when you almost got to the point where you were like,
Honey child.
so talk about that. How did you navigate that?
For me, navigating, I mean, because my ex-boyfriend is a handsome guy. Definitely incredibly attracted to him. We traveled a lot, so we were in foreign places, which added to the romance. So for me, it was more of a spirit. It was more of a spiritual thing. So the taking the sex off the table was twofold for me. It was that being raised where you save yourself for marriage. The other part of it was that the sex, it's my experience was once you did have the sex, then relationship changed.
It shifts, yeah.
It shifts,
It
right?
shifts.
So it's just kind of like, okay, I've conquered. Okay, you've conquered that. And so then things change. So for the life of me, I don't understand that with the men I will just speak for myself, Chiquetta.
Yeah,
Men that I have had, and good men, but the men that I've had experiences with, it's just like, okay, so you've conquered it, but
you got that.
nothing with my personality, nothing with the energy that I bring to the relationship, nothing with all of the other things that I have to offer matter. So now
Yeah.
that you've conquered, now things shift and change. And so that's when I knew with the combination, the strong desire, because I always felt convicted after, having sex.
Oh, your whole just even
My
before this
whole
whole
entire my whole
you felt
entire
convicted.
convicted.
Why?
And I think because I was so ingrained in that foundation of saving myself for marriage.
For the church thing.
For
Okay,
the
got
church,
it.
my father, the church, and it was just so ingrained that there was this guilty thing. And then not only that, like I made a a gallant promise to God that I would save myself. So I think all of that and and having these experiences afterwards, it was like, oh my God, I'm hurting God, right? Like so there was that kind of
Or you're lying to God, or you're being
yeah,
unfaithful to God, or you're
yeah,
not being faithful to yourself.
that in the promise. And I
Yeah,
think when you promise something, you want to uphold it. Any
yeah,
any any good and decent person that makes a promise is going to try to uphold it as best as
yeah.
possible. And I gotten myself in situations where it's just like, ugh. But for me, it was that dual thing of the
Hmm.
spirituality, and then the fact that what I noticed, the pattern in my uh, experiences
Hmm.
has been that things shift when sex is put on the table. And so I'm like, okay,
But not
well,
shifting in a good way. You
not
didn't.
shifting in a good way.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
never, yeah. So that when I say, those situationships or those relationships didn't end up fruitful, they didn't end up fruitful. I
What did
desired,
you learn from them?
I learned that, hmm, I learned a lot about myself,
Which is,
which is the lack of self-love.
mm,
I had a lot of self-confidence, but the lack of self-love, and I didn't know what that looked like. And so all of that goes back to childhood, how you're
yeah,
raised. A lot has to do with your relationship with your father or the lack thereof.
thereof, or no
Um,
relationship at all.
yeah. And
Hmm.
so all of that, like, what does love look like?
Yes.
Right? What does relationship love look like? And so it was for me, it was digging deep and figuring and trying to figure out what love looked like and then what self-love looked like. And so especially during my 30s is when and then my early 40s is when I was like, oh, self-love is choosing me.
Yes.
And not compromising. Self-love is saying, hey, if you don't match up, well, God's got me and God has something else and better for me. So you're not the end all be all. I
Yeah.
remember dating a guy in college and thinking, oh, this is the best they could get. He went to the same church as me. And, so we lined up uh, spiritually. I
Yeah.
was attracted to him, but he treated me like crap. And in a very cute way. And I say that because when you deal with the narcissist,
Yes. Speak
there
it.
there are all of these hidden things that there are just so many hidden things that make it okay for them. And
Yeah.
if you don't have enough confidence in yourself, well, in this case, I had enough confidence in myself. I didn't know what self love was.
Was. Hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
so when there's the lack of the self love, then you're willing to put up with things.
Anything. A
I
lot
mean,
of anything.
oh gosh, it was
Yeah.
just, and he was like, I wouldn't even say lightweight. He was verbally abusive, but in
Uh,
the cutest, endearing way.
wait. Oh,
Oh, you know,
pause. Wait.
oh,
Pause.
mhm.
How are you? How are you? What you just? Would you? How did you? How did you say that? You
So
said he was
he was verbally abusive
abusive.
in the most cute, enduring way. So the way in which he would say things to me would be like, mind you, I'm like a size 8. He would like poke my stomach and be like, "Oh, what is that?" Yeah, so the
Ah.
personality, he had this charming personality, and so it's
Uh-huh.
just like, "Oh," and it was just like very soft and
And
cute and
subtle, but it
so
also
so
had a way
subtle,
of
but it
got
my
here.
my mind,
Yes.
right?
That's a tactic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so and so it was that manipulation,
Yeah.
that kind of, again, that narcissistic behavior where
Yeah.
looking back at it, I was like, wait, he
Yeah.
ripped me to shreds in
Uh-huh.
the most soft way. But that was his thing in the most charming, soft way. It was not
Yeah.
loud. It was very quiet. It was very just kind of not almost like matter of fact, but
Yeah.
it wasn't in a
It wasn't
violent way,
dogmatic.
but it just,
It almost was like a slithering, like a snake, kind of just moves.
exactly,
And you
exactly.
don't even know it until you're
So
like
you're
it,
out of it.
and here's the thing, here's how I know what you mean. Like, I dated a guy who I thought I was deeply in love with, and I remember he used to always he would do amazing things for me. He did grandiose things for me, but he would always say, not not every time, but often enough for me to remember, that I want to make it difficult for the next man.
Mm,
And at the time I laughed it off. I was just like, but in my inners, I knew like something about what he's saying is not right.
mm,
Because and then when I really looked back at the relationship, when once it was over, I was like, no man who intends to be with you, who wants to be with you, who honors you, would ever think of the next man and how he's going to couch his behavior to make it difficult. So
that
the next guy is going to have to up the ante to do something better than he already did. And I was like,
that
damn,
that part.
that
And
part.
that part. And you're in it and you're like, you don't realize it because
Yeah.
for me, I didn't know what the self-love looked like. I
Yes.
didn't know even how to defend myself in the proper way. It was almost like I
Yes.
was mute.
Yes.
And so and then growing up in the church where, you're the and again, my experience was growing up in the church, and kids are seen and not heard, and
Yeah.
so there was this inability to voice and stand up for myself when it came to
Yes.
men specifically, because you have these male authoritative roles in the church, and then my dad
Yes.
was assistant pastor, then eventually pastor, and so then there's that additional father, authoritative role. And so even approaching him with certain things was very difficult. So my ability to speak up for myself when it came to males was very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, that goes back to that self-love. It goes back
Mm-hmm.
to having a voice. And so it was a journey for me again, that being in my 30s and discovering, okay, well, I definitely like have some issues like that I
Yeah.
need to deal with, but not even realizing it. But with
That
that,
you have them.
yeah, but with
Okay.
every
Here
relationship, learning just a little bit more, like, oh
about.
no,
Mm-hmm.
Oh no.
So here's what I'll admit, because you've mentioned a couple of times with your dad being in the church, him being a church leader, and how that trickles down to you, and I'm sure your siblings. I will admit that my father did not grow up in my household. I knew my father, I knew what he looked like, but he was never a part of my life.
Mm,
And it wasn't until years later, much like you, probably around the 30-year mark, that I realized that in relationship,
mm,
I subconsciously used men as tools.
mm,
Like they were factors for things to go out with, to have fun, to whatever. Marriage was never on my mind. And then it hit me one day when a guy was telling me how much he loved me, and I just didn't believe him. And I
mm,
realized, how can I believe that you love me, man, when my father, whose DNA I share, never
mm,
showed I never saw it mirrored in my life at all.
mm.
So I'm supposed to believe that you love me,
Stranger.
a stranger.
Mhm.
And then I had to ultimately deal with the fact, like, he could actually sincerely love me. He could. But because I have this thing over here, I need to
Mhm.
deal with this thing over here. And much
Mhm.
like you, I've dealt with that thing. So now moving into relationship and love looks and feels completely different. But you're right.
Completely
Those
different.
wounds that we
Yes.
have, and particularly as Black women. And I used to think it was because, I didn't have my dad in the house, but I was like, no, there are women who
No.
have their dads in the
Yes.
house.
My
And
dad
they're
was very
still,
present. Yes.
yeah,
Very present. And the thing of it is that we're all going to have some childhood wounds, right? Your experience is different than mine. My dad was
yeah,
very present, but he was present physically, but he didn't know how to emotionally connect. So I had someone who was there, but I needed that emotional connection, but and affection and love. And
yeah,
so where was I getting that affection, that love and attention? Boys.
yeah,
The boys were always my default, but in my experiences, even as early as middle school and high school, was it was all it was still very physical, and not
yeah.
in physical in the sense of there's this attraction, but unless you're really taught in your household how and what love looks like, if you're unless you're seeing that in a healthy way,
Hmm.
you don't know what
You don't know
it
what
is.
it is.
You don't know what it
And
is.
then you may even unfortunately, you may equate love with what you're seeing that's a negative thing or a
Correct.
bad thing, and that's how you build your whole
Correct.
that's how you deal with men, that's how you show up in relationship. Okay, so
Correct.
now that you've done a lot of self-discovery as well as written an amazing book,
Oh, thank you.
which let's talk about that really quick because you wrote Rise of a Good Woman, which I love that title.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Rise of the Good Woman, a 22-day guide to becoming a better you. I basically break down Proverbs 31 and make it applicable for the modern woman. And it's my journey because all this self discovery and getting to self love was like, okay, what does the Bible? So, I'm a PK. What does
Yeah.
the Bible say about? Because if this is something that I desire, what can I do to prepare? Excuse me.
Yeah.
So what can I do to prepare for marriage? And so the only thing I knew that was going to get me there was Proverbs 31. So
Yeah.
I basically asked God, I did a lot of research and came up with basically kind of like an outline of what each scripture meant. And then I turned it into a book. So initially it was just supposed to be something that I shared amongst friends, and at that point I had written um, three other books that I hadn't published, but then my friends were like, hey, I think this is some good stuff that you could create a book out of.
Hmm.
So for me, that book was birthed on preparing myself for marriage. So there were some things, because I've been in all these situationships, some things I based upon experience, knew about men. And the other
Hmm.
part of that, because that passage talks about this woman, her husband, and her family. And so there were healthy marriages, long-term marriage folks that I would speak to, both men and women. And I also spoke with men who were divorced. And I think that you stand the chance that because I always ask anybody who's divorced, male or female,
Yeah.
what did you learn? What would you do
Yes.
different? What would you tell someone who has yet to be married
Mm-hmm.
about marriage?
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
so,
good.
and I still ask, what are your words of advice? What can a woman do? What in your eyes, what should a wife do? And uh, overwhelmingly, the biggest thing is respect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then that ability and that safe space to be expressive are the top two. Definitely sex was a big thing too, because
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes I was hearing that in a marriage situation, there's not a lot of sex
Yeah,
happening.
sexless marriages too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those were the top three things as I would talk to married men and then also divorced men. Those were their top things: respect, that emotional space to be able to be expressive, and then definitely making sure that sex was not like once a quarter or
Yeah.
like my birthday. Who just wants
Yeah.
to play sex, right?
Yeah.
And so, all that to say that the book itself was a lot of research, but it's very practical day to day. And that for me was that additional, that self love,
Mm-hmm.
and that marriage prep. So, really, honestly, the desire to become, to get married was my journey to really discovering myself and
Yes.
discovering
Mhm.
what self love actually was, because in discovering that, then I was able to hone in on not only what I wanted, and like you said earlier, what I didn't want for
Mhm.
sure, right?
Mhm.
And the things that were like realizing what was going to be lasting for me. Like my
Mhm.
ex-boyfriend, we weren't on the same page spiritually. We also weren't on the same page financially. And those are two very major things,
Yes.
especially when you talk about the possibility of raising children
Yes.
or, and just how you're running your household. And so those were things I'm like, no, I'm not going to compromise on that. Right. And so there's going to be things that uh, you know, there are going to be times that you're going to have to be selfless in the relationship,
Of
right?
course.
In a marriage
Of
situation,
course.
there's sacrifices made, there's compromises, etc. So my thing was, oh, okay, with each relationship is like, no, I can't compromise on that. No, I can't compromise on that. And so that all of that, the whole entire journey led me to now.
Okay, so let's talk about now. Let's talk about now. And let's also talk about, well, first, let's talk about now. So where are you now? Because I know you are dating someone now.
Yes. And it's funny because, so I will say this, some people are, a lot of people, because at some point, so my family never pressured me. I never got the, when are you going to get married, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what it was about me that they just avoided that question.
Mhm.
um but so I never had any pressure to be married. um so that's,
And we need to take pressure off
oh
women,
my god,
period. Just take it off.
just take it off,
Stop.
because one, not everybody wants to be married,
Nope.
right?
Mm-mm. Nope.
And then when that happens, there's so many things that, I mean, I could have got married to the guy that was verbally abusive.
Yeah.
I could have been married.
Yeah.
So it's
You could have
not
been married
about,
2, 3, 4 times by
oh
now.
yeah,
Mhm.
totally.
Yeah,
Um,
me too.
but also seeing that those weren't going to be good fits.
Mhm.
And again, not knowing that it was self-love and me choosing myself, but choosing myself and getting out of those relationships, right? And then
Absolutely.
rebuilding myself up. And then who is Stacy? Who am
Okay,
I?
Stacy, tell me how,
Yeah.
because I know people are waiting like, girl, tell me how you met the man. Get to the meat.
So what I was gonna say is sometimes your guy, you might already know him. There were a lot of
Ah,
people saying, "Oh, well, maybe you haven't met him yet." And I'm like, "Well, what if I do already know him?" And so in my case, I already knew my guy. But my guy was married.
at the time that you knew
Yeah.
him?
So maybe
Okay.
he's married to the wrong person or the person for a period of time. And
Yeah.
that is, in my case, what happened.
But let me clarify before people go on, because you did say my guy was married. Let me be clear. She was not dating the man while the man was married. Okay.
Correct.
Let's be clear. She knew him as a friend.
As a
Okay.
friend.
And he was married,
Yeah.
but there was no shenanigans.
No,
Okay.
no, not at
You
all.
got to
Not
say
at all.
stuff because, stuff
Yes,
goes left.
that part. That part. No,
Uh-huh.
and we actually met in college. Um, his roommate at the time and my roommate at the time were seeing each other. So they would have a lot of parties and get-togethers and whatnot. And I was over the house and I was like, oh my God, I had such a major crush on him. But I knew at the time he was a star athlete at Georgia Tech and Georgia Tech football. And so I was like, ugh, too many girls around. He was a Kappa. I was like,
Ooh,
I am not in the competition business. I don't
right.
compete. If you can't realize that I'm the prize, um, and in if you just can't realize that I'm one in a lifetime, then that's on you. And that's how I saw it. And so I kind of backed off. So we remained well, we weren't ever like really close friends. I just had this major crush on him. And over the years, we eventually became Facebook friends. But over the years, I would see, oh, he got married. Oh, she's cute. Oh, he had a baby. Oh, all the things. And just like, oh, just well wishes, but no
Right.
communication, but just friends on Facebook. And so in the process, I actually became cool with his best friend. So his former roommate was his best friend. And so I was able to kind of get bits and pieces, but nothing like in a weird kind of way. Just like a matter of fact, like, he knew I had a crush on his guy. And so every now and again he would come up in conversation every couple years or something like that. And so via social, I was like, oh, he's coming out with a book. And I was like, oh, um, so I started just kind of supporting him in his efforts because I knew what it was like to be an author. And we just going back and forth on social. And so he hits me up on IG DM and is like, hey, I'm gonna be in Atlanta. I'd like to connect. And so I was like, oh, sure. So it just so happened. So this is about a year ago now. Super Bowl weekend, we met up at the airport in Atlanta. So he lives in South Florida, but was in Atlanta for business. We met up at the airport and we basically like hit it off. Now, the funny part about it is,
Did you know he was still married? Did you know he
oh,
was
he
not
was
married?
divorced. Yeah, yeah. I found out he
Okay.
was divorced through social media. So yeah, let's
Okay.
let's be very clear. Very
Yeah, that's
divorced.
what I'm saying. That's why I
Yeah.
brought it up, because the way I'm hearing you, but
Uh-huh.
I know the story too. So I'm like, let me say right, put a pin right there.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
divorced by then. Okay, go
Yes.
ahead.
Yes. Very divorced.
Yeah.
And the divorce for him was a lot of healing and the catalyst for the book that he was writing, because it was his journey of healing.
Right.
And so yes, so very divorced. And so we met up, basically just like hit it off. I was super nervous because this is the old crush of mine. I don't know that yeah, I mean, I would say that I stopped the crush. Was still attracted to the guy,
Of course.
um, but yeah, we hit it off, and it's funny because he didn't quite remember me, which is so funny to me because I was like, well, yeah, there was so many girls around, and so we only had like maybe less than a handful of like interactions, but there were always other people around. Um,
So
so
did you give him the whole speech of the no sex and the da, 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 da,
oh
da?
yeah, 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 yeah,
And
for
how
sure.
did he receive that?
Well, it's always I'll support you, which is the typical, and he's very supportive.
Uh-huh.
Very supportive, and when do we have it though? I'm trying to think. Because now, so for reference, I, live in Atlanta, he lives in South Florida, and because I'm a flight attendant, because basically we have a long distance relationship.
Ah,
Yeah, so that's a whole nother
that's
caveat.
always different
Yeah,
too.
that's
Yeah.
a whole nother caveat and to the relationship. And then
Do you like that?
as a flight attendant, it works. And then he's a single father, and so he has two of his boys every other week. So that kind of gives like the rotation in which we have, it gives that because these, when parents are parenting, they're like,
Let me ask you this question
you're
too.
not getting a lot of, you talk to any of your friends who have children and they're like, it's so much attention and so much, um,
So
you know,
much that goes into raising kids. I get it. Let me ask you
yeah,
this question though. So, even though, like I said, you're long distance, he has children, you have a busy life and all of that, and I also realize that there can be people who will respect the fact that you people, not people, men that you date, who
mhm,
can respect the fact that you do not want to have sex. But let's just say if the man, and I'm not saying this is your guy, but I'm just saying the man
mhm.
decides, I still want to respect what she's doing. I still want to get to know her, but I still want to have this thing over here where I am at least fulfilling this need, because I think people have to be on the same page about the no sex thing.
Oh yeah.
And let's just say if that is not your partner's thing, but he still wants to get to know you, then would you date somebody?
No.
And then again, I guess too, they probably wouldn't tell you that they're doing that either.
They
They probably wouldn't tell you.
this one would.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
this
not,
one
and I'm
would.
not saying
Well,
your
but
guy. I'm
yeah.
speaking in a broader term because, like I said, more than just us are having this conversation. There will be other people who will be watching it, and I'm
Oh
I'm
yeah.
thinking, if I'm a man, if I want to, if I'm not where you are, because we don't always line up at places at the same time,
Right.
then how do I work around the fact that I am attracted to this woman? I am physically attracted to this woman, and as you continue on in the relationship, you're going to get closer. Um,
Yeah, and I think
that's
I
just
think it's that initial discussion when you bring it, when you initially talk about it, you've got to say, okay, well, I don't know that I could do that. And is it okay if I'm over here? Or if that's the case, then maybe we should just be friends. So it's that
yeah.
initial conversation. I think the conversations, well, let me put it this way, conversations that I've had post 40 have been grown man and grown woman conversations.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot easier in regard it, and whether or not we agree or we we get to a middle ground, where we're both like, okay, I can compromise on that, or the discussion is at least had
Yeah.
in a very mature and healthy way. And
How
so
long do you how long do you believe you're going to be able to do long distance before you are in a relationship where you, because I mean, I think long distance is nice. I also think it's kind of romantic and whimsical when you date like that. But it's not the true, and I'm not saying your relationship is not true. It is true.
Mhm.
But it's not the complete picture of what you would be like if you are living in the same city day to day. That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
there is a lot of, when the boys are here, and his boys are wonderful.
Right.
um, um, but when I'm here and the boys are here, it's very much like life is definitely moving. Meetings, appointments, life is happening while I'm here. So it's not like we're long distance and I'm coming during the weekends when things are different. I'm coming
Right.
when there are things going on. So I definitely have a really good idea of how things and how he is. Because I'm here sometimes for stretches of 7 days, sometimes 10 days. So I've gotten a really good idea of how he moves.
Hmm.
And my first visitation here, um, he dropped me off and he had errands to run, so he just left me to rest. So just there's this certain comfortability and familiarity with him that's different.
So basically, I guess you're saying to women to kind of look and go through their Rolodex of men who they've encountered or who they may have possibly liked, dated, whatever, and kind of revisit and see if that could be a possibility of something. Let's move up
Yeah,
to how long do you believe, because you said you've been dating him for a year, right?
just
At
about.
least, just
We're headed
about.
into a year.
So have you had the conversation about next steps as it relates to being in the same city, possibility of marriage, or are you good kind of where you are?
Well, we definitely initially were like, we want to take our time. We no children. He has 4 boys, 2 older boys and 2 younger boys. And so I'm like, perfect. And they're boys, which is even better. So I have this opportunity
Why do you
to,
prefer boys rather than any girls?
first of all, boys, I feel like are a lot easier
Yeah.
um, across the board.
Yep.
But boys are a lot easier. And because when I was, so my parents are divorced and my father remarried. So I have a little bit of trauma when it comes to like the the new wife coming in and kind of feeling like she's taking my place and taking my time. So it's a little bit of, for me, I knew dating a man with girls
Girls. It's
was going
just
to be
different.
more difficult, and we've
Mhm.
even discussed this before.
Yeah.
Was going to be
Unfortunately, it's almost like competition, even though it's not
it,
competition,
it
but
is
it is a form of
it
competition when a
is
father has a daughter, has a new woman.
exactly
There's a dynamic that is really hard if you're not capable of managing it, because it almost feels like the daughter after the ex-wife is the first woman, and the woman that you date comes behind her when it's like,
exactly yeah
yeah,
and it's that that father daughter dynamic. And if you're, because I would only want to date someone who's a good father,
good
right?
for, of
Like,
course, of
so
course.
so
It's a
it
double-edged sword.
yeah so it's like, so then if you have a daughter, I've been the child on the other side of that, and I know what that feels like. And so for me, it just,
It's a no.
having boys is a lot. It's just a lot
It's
easier.
easier. Yep.
It's a lot easier. And fathers, healthy fathers who can provide all of those points, physical, emotional, spiritual covering for their daughters. Um, when they're doing all of those things, then there's a lot of attention that goes into the girls.
Yeah.
That's a little bit different when you talk about boys. So all that to say that, um, uh, how we're, moving and being raised in time. For me, we knew, again, we wanted to take our time. So that was agreed upon. No children. And so that just really equaled. We don't have to rush.
Right.
At the time, I was 46. So at 46, it was just like, I don't need to be like, oh, my biological clock is ticking, like, because it really is. But because then
Do you
children,
want to have children?
no, I'm good.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Um,
that's changed at some point, because you remember a long time ago
yeah, I
when we
thought,
talked, that was something
yeah,
that you were possibly interested. So
yeah.
that's changed. Okay,
Well,
got
and
it.
I definitely wanted to leave it on the table because I didn't know how my husband was going to come.
Right.
I didn't know if he was going to come with a package. With
Do you believe this guy's your husband?
I do,
Okay.
I do, and
Okay.
we've been referring to it as purpose partners,
Ah,
because our lives really just line up, just in terms of purpose, in
yeah.
terms of what we want to leave and give the world. There's a lot of compatibility. There's a lot of things that just really align with the two of us. And from obviously, we're both authors. We both have self help books. We're both into health and wellness. And there's just all of these synergies that we have that we know, and have started to prove that we make a great team. And
How do you deal with having his boys? Because you would not stepmom, but whatever your role, whatever you want to be named in that.
bonus mom.
Okay. And then of course his former wife. Like,
Mhm.
how easy has it been to really blend all of that really
What?
quickly before we wrap this up?
Yeah. So I haven't met her yet, but I do have
Okay.
a good relationship with the boys. And we hit it off. They were a little kind of shy at first, but warmed up really. They warmed up quicker than I thought they were going to warm up.
Good.
Just because it's like, who's this new woman? And but they've got a really good system of every other week. So like, I had mentioned he's a single father, so he has the boys every other week. And so sometimes my visits coordinate with when the boys are in town, and sometimes they don't. And so so far so good. I mean, it's one of those things where, like I
Wait,
mentioned.
well, I'm sorry. I'm about to get all in your business. So when you're there visiting,
uh
do you guys sleep in the same space
Yeah,
or do you sleep in, okay.
yeah,
And so you still sleep in the same space and there's no,
there is.
okay. Cause I'm like, cause baby, let me tell you something. I'm like, you better than me. Cause hey, I'm all for it, but I really am like, if that's something I'm not gonna do, I can't be in. Ooh. Okay, let me ask this question,
Uh-huh.
because I'm all in your business. What would you give as advice or positivity or a probability for women who are in their 40s and probably perhaps older who want love, who want companionship, who want partnership, but it just is not happening in this climate in these United States of America with the way people are, and what would you provide as optimism, hope?
Well, I mean, like you were mentioning earlier, do you already know him? That might be a possibility.
I don't know him.
This might be it might be someone you overlooked. It might be someone whose life has brought them somewhere else. Again, my guy was married, now divorced. So, even 5 years ago, he wasn't someone that was that could be presented or on the table because he was married. And
Right.
so you never know how your life cycle is gonna turn around. Do you know someone from high school or college that, maybe never got married or is now single that you were interested in back then? You never know. I so if you My whole thing is that if you desire it, then what are you doing to then prepare for it? So then one, you might already know him. So there is hope there. Then two, what are you doing to prepare for him? And how are you creating that space for him? Do you love yourself? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you doing things that you would then you know look for in him? So my thing was, I want someone to mirror me, and Charles mirrors me. And so, but then what does that look like, right? If I desire someone who is, you know has and takes initiative to have, health and wellness, um, and being just healthy mind, body, soul, spirit. And so, am I doing the same thing? And so, I think the question is what you're desiring. Are you matching up to what you want in a mate? So
Got it.
there's that self work. I did a lot of it.
Yeah.
I did a lot of questioning myself. I did a lot of questioning and searching through God, and really getting my spiritual together, and then just really getting to that self love. Because then with that, you create your boundaries. You know what you're willing to compromise on and not
And
willing to
what you're not.
compromise on.
And
And
then sometimes you just have to, you could do all the work, you could be self aware, you could check all the boxes yourself.
mhm,
But sometimes the bottom line is you have to wait because the other side of that is perhaps he's not ready and
correct,
he's working.
correct.
So let me ask this last question before we
Uh-huh.
wrap this up. What do you love about being Black?
Oh, what's not to love? I mean, is that a rhetorical question?
Mm-mm.
Um, I I just think we are the ultimate spice of life. I feel like not only are we loving and accepting, and sometimes a little bit too accepting of things,
Hmm.
um, I just feel like we are the creme de la creme. We are the spice of life. I think that we add flavor to this world. I know that we add flavor. I know that we add culture, and it, it's almost indescribable. Like I couldn't imagine being anything other than Black. Like
Hmm.
I take so much pride, And I want to be like, I'm like, I'm too light. I want to be darker. I'm like, give me some more color, honey. You
You want to
know,
be
I'm like,
somewhere in this situation.
exactly. Let me give me that hue, honey. Cause
Mm-hmm.
like I just think the blacker the better.
Mm-hmm.
I just think we are the epitome of what God created humans to be.
Mm-hmm.
Period. I love
Period.
us. And I know sometimes we could be, but it is still just so wonderful. Like
Mm-hmm.
being Black. Like it's almost like literally I'm a loss for words. Like
Yeah.
because I just think we are the creme de la creme.
Mm.
There's nothing like being Black, even despite what other people think outside of our race. There's just
And all the things that we have gone
that
through,
we have gone through, and
and still we still show up. We still are elite.
yep,
We still are beautiful. And there will never be a thing that can clamp down or end us.
yes, undefeated, undisputed.
Yeah.
Um, like we're 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 the creme de la creme. That's the best way to like. I would say we can't be duplicated
Mm-hmm.
as much as people try.
Try.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
y'all try,
Yeah,
but
very much.
we
But
cannot
there is nothing
nothing.
like the blueprint,
Oh my goodness.
like the foundation of a thing. Absolutely. Stacey Lord, I thank you so much for being here, for talking
Thank
with me.
you.
And of course, for all of you who want to know more about Stacey, more about her book, if you want to purchase her book, read her book, I'm going to have all of the information so that all you need to do is click or read, or it'll take you to Stacey. And Stacey, you know I love you.
I love you,
I love you.
Pepper.
And I'm so happy to see that you are happy and that you are actually being able to eat off the fruits of your labor when it comes to love and wanting partnership and connection. And Lord have mercy, I'm just hoping this conversation morphs its way through my phone into my DNA so that I can find, or whoever looking for me can find me.
There,
Okay?
there is hope,
Yes.
and I feel like God won't forget about you, and that's what
I know you
I
won't.
always would say. He hasn't forgotten about me. He has
Mhm.
not forgotten about me. Yeah. So
I
keep the
know.
faith.
I do, and I will. All of us will.
Yes.
All of us will. Thank you, Stacey, so
All
much.
right. Love
We're going
you.
to end it here. Love you too.